Hello viewers, here you have Naazir Mahmood again with our usual brief videos on various topics. Today our topic will be something about Urdu literature, and there is an interesting episode about one of the first novelists, Urdu novelists, Deputy Nazeer Ahmed. Uh, our friend Dr. Asif Farooqi, who died around 6 months back, he, in one of his articles, when he was writing about COVID and pestilence related literature, he wrote about one book by Deputy Nazeer Ahmed, who was his grandfather, Dr. Asif Farooqi's grandfather, great grandfather, sorry, about Tawbatun Nusu. Tawbatun Nusu is an Urdu novel, one of the earliest Urdu novels. This is one volume, earlier volume, and then there is another second volume of Tawbatun Nusu. So here I have an English translation of Tawbatun Nusu. This was translated by Wajid Naeemuddin and published by OUP. This is easily available in the market. So this Tawbatun Nusu has a chapter in which one of the protagonists, one of the main characters, Nusu, burns the books of his son, who he considers as not religious enough. And there is a story behind it, and then the story is that Nusu, during a pestilence in mid 19th century in Delhi, he falls seriously ill, becomes victim of that pestilence, and in that he has a dream, and in that dream he looks at himself. He witnesses an episode in which he is presented on the judgment day in front of Almighty, and then he realizes that he has nothing much to show, no good deeds. When he wakes up and he recovers from that illness, Nusu has this intense feeling that probably he should become more religious, so that in the end, in the hereafter, he can show something to his creator. So in that he himself becomes very religious, and then he wants the whole family to turn to religion, and his son resists, and so much so that there is a disagreement between them, and the son leaves home, and but the father Nusu, what he does, he goes into his son's room and burns all his books, which he considers not good for young people to read. So this is a book burning episode in that book, Tawbatun Nusu. Then my friend Ajmal Kamal, who is editor of Urdu literary journal Aaj, he reminded me that in fact Deputy Nazeer Ahmed, who himself presented that chapter of book burning in Tawbatun Nusu, he himself became a victim when his last book was burnt publicly. How that happened, this episode is interesting because not probably many people know about it. Against Deputy Nazeer Ahmed, there were many people who were not happy with his writings, especially his novels. As it happens, whenever somebody, because he was one of the first novelists in Urdu, and when his books were widely read, there were so many other people who did not like it and who started propaganda against him. Then he also translated Quran. So when he translated the Quran, there were some religious people who did not like the translation. So they again started a campaign against him that the translation is not good enough. And then finally, in his last years of life, I think he was almost 80 years at that time, or at least in his late 70s, he wrote a book called Ummahatul Ummah. Now that book generated a lot of controversy in Delhi, and there were so many religious people who did not like it and who started a campaign against him. There were slogans, there were rallies, and finally he was forced. Initially he resisted, but then Hakim Ajmal Khan intervened, and in order to solve this problem, he persuaded Deputy Nazeer Ahmed to surrender all his books so that the books can be burned publicly. So all the copies that they could get from his home, they were brought into the street, and that's where there was another person called Maulana Habib Sherwani. He came forward and he torched the book. When the book was torched, people thought that the episode had ended. But Deputy Nazeer Ahmed himself was very dejected. And after that, he could not survive for long, and after a couple of years, he died. Anyway, he was old also. But once he died, then Allama Rashidul Khairi, again, who was one of the pioneers of Urdu literature, especially prose at that time, he started serializing the same book in his literary magazine. But nobody protested at that time. And all these details we get to know from Shahid Ahmed Dehelvi, who was Deputy Nazeer Ahmed's grandson. So he writes, Shahid Ahmed Dehelvi writes, that he then asked some of the people who had led a campaign against Deputy Nazeer Ahmed, asked them why, when the book was being serialized, nobody protested. So they responded by saying that actually we were against Deputy Nazeer Ahmed, and since he is no more, there is no reason to protest. So then he thought, Shahid Ahmed Dehelvi, because he also had a couple of copies of it, so he, after some time, not immediately, after almost 25 years. Now this episode happened in, I think, 1908 or 9. After almost 25 years, in 1933 or 34, Shahid Ahmed Dehelvi decided to reprint the same book. When the book reprinted, after 25 years, once again a campaign started against the book. And Shahid Ahmed Dehelvi again was forced to surrender his books. But then Azim Beg Chughtai comes into picture, and Azim Beg Chughtai says, wrote to Shahid Ahmed Dehelvi that I am here in Rajasthan. At that time he was living in Rajasthan, said, oh, send all the books to me. So Shahid Ahmed Dehelvi sent all around 200 copies to Azim Beg Chughtai. When he got the book, he should have kept the books, but what he did, he even went one step further and he released an advertisement in the newspaper, Azim Beg Chughtai, regarding the book, announcing that he had all the copies of that book, and if anybody wants to get the book, can go to him. Now, when this advertisement was published, once again there was hue and cry, and people, started protesting. And then he was also forced, he resisted, but then he was forced to surrender those books. Those books were again brought into the public, and those books were torched. And Azim Beg Chughtai, after that, he could also not survive, and I think he died just at the age of 40 or 41. He was a relatively young man. Azim Beg Chughtai was again a good writer of humor and satire, but after that he was also so dejected he could not survive. So the reason why I shared with you this episode is to just highlight one of the episodes in Urdu literature when this happened, and that reminds us that in many throughout history we have seen book burning, and whenever a thought goes against the mainstream thinking of society, there is normally a backlash, and people resist and protest, and book burning is also one of the methods of expressing their anger against those people who try to deviate from the mainstream thought. So this talk was about the last book of Deputy Nazeer Ahmed. The name of the book was Ummahatul Ummah, and this book was burnt twice. Once when he was still alive in 1908, and then after 25 years in 1934 or 35 once again. So this was a brief episode, and I am sure it must have added to your knowledge. I request you to subscribe to Gauri channel, where we keep uploading such brief videos for you. Thank you very much.
Hey there. Subscribe to my channel. And also press this bell icon, so you never miss any new updates, cause whenever we upload new video you will get a notification on your phone.